Consciousness Only. By Bodhisattva Vasubandhu. Translated into Chinese by the Dharma teacher of the Tripitaka, Xianzang of the Great Tang Dynasty. Translated from the Chinese. By Francis H. Cook. Introduction to the 30 Verses on Consciousness Only.
The short verse work referred to commonly as the 30 Verses is one of several important Buddhist treatises that propound the idea that nothing exists except consciousness or mind, or that all things believed by the ordinary person to be objective realities outside mind are in reality mere mental constructs. These treatises, along with several related scriptural works, represent one of several important streams of Mahayana Buddhist teaching that include the doctrine of emptiness, the doctrine of the matrix of Buddhahood, and the doctrine of the Buddha nature. Those who taught the doctrine of consciousness, or practice of yoga, as it was also called, specialized in the theory of how the cognition of the true nature of things becomes distorted in humans through the processes of conceptualization, false imagination, and discrimination, and how the mind is restored to its innate purity and clarity, once more capable of seeing things as they truly are, undistorted by delusion and error.
One of the leaders in articulating this complex teaching was the great Indian Buddhist scholar monk Vasubandhu, who is believed to have lived during the 4th century. To him is attributed a number of important treatises such as the 30 Verses, as well as commentaries on scriptures. He is revered by all later Far Eastern schools of Buddhism for his authority, vast learning in Buddhist doctrine, and important contributions to the development of Buddhism. The main point of the 30 Verses is that the object of perception believed to be a real thing outside of the perceiving consciousness does not really exist externally at all. It is said to be nothing but a mental construct projected by consciousness itself and therefore nothing but a transformation of consciousness. This much is clear from a reading of the 30 Verses. However, the main problem for the reader is that of determining in what precise sense it should be understood that the many sense data of everyday life are nothing but mental constructs. Interpreted in a radical manner, one arrives at philosophical idealism in which the teaching means literally that there is absolutely not in any sense anything external to the individual perceiving mind.
However, nothing is radical as this is called for, and the teaching of consciousness only is not a species of philosophical idealism. What Vasubandhu and other spokesmen for Buddhism are arguing is that the pure immediacy of any cognitive experience is distorted as soon as it occurs, through the superimposition of imaginary labels onto the experience. Thus the actual experience is interpreted by the mind, and this process reinforces the subsequent tendency to interpret in the same manner. The result is that the mind mistakes its stereotyped and habitual interpretations of events for the actual events. It is not that nothing exists in a world external to the mind, but rather that the unenlightened individual is trapped in false consciousness and has no access to the real world outside the mind. The world experienced by the unenlightened is thus an exclusively mental, imaginary world filled with unrealities such as selves, others, Buddhas, and ordinary beings, good and bad, and so on. Such a world is a world of discrimination, imagination, stereotyped reaction, and sedimented responses to experience, and consequently unreal. The last few verses of the treatise deal with the process of ending this chronic distortion of experience. Vasubandhu speaks metaphorically of a transmutation of the support, which refers to a crucial change in the nature and function of ordinary consciousness and personality. It ends delusion and error and precipitates a pristine, non-diluted cognition of events, which is the awakened perception of a Buddha.
The work translated here is number 1586 in volume 31 of the Teisho Shinshit Daizokyo. The brief prose passages interspersed with the verses are the interpretive comments of the Chinese monk Xianzang, who translated the text from the Sanskrit. The verses are the same as those that serve as the basis for the extended commentary of the Demonstration of Consciousness Only, printed elsewhere in this volume. In that work, however, the verses are given extensive comments by various Indian Buddhist scholars and manipulated in such a way that the verses evoke a very radical interpretation not found in the verses as translated here alone. The text of the 30 Verses exists in the original Sanskrit as well as the Chinese translation by Xianzang. The Sanskrit text has been translated and commented on extensively by Stefan Anacker, in 7 works of Vasubandhu, Delhi, Motilal Banarsidass, 1984, and Thomas A. Kachamuddam, A Buddhist Doctrine of Experience, Delhi, Motilal Banarsidass, 1982.
Bodhisattvas such as Dharmapala created the demonstration of consciousness only in agreement with these 30 verses. Now, I will briefly show the reasons. In these 30 verses, the first 24 verses show the characteristics of consciousness only. The next verse shows the nature of consciousness only. The last 5 verses show active states of consciousness only. Of the first 24 verses, the first verse and a half explain the characteristics of consciousness only briefly. The next 22 and a half verses explain the characteristics of consciousness only extensively. That is, some outsider asks, if there is only consciousness, why do ordinary people and holy teachings say that a self and dharmas exist? The verses reply.
The metaphor of self and dharmas. Evolves in various ways. Upon the transformation of consciousness. The transforming consciousness is threefold: retribution, thought, and perception of the external realm. The next 22 and a half verses extensively explain the characteristics of consciousness only, because the prior verses mentioned the three transforming consciousnesses briefly. Now, they extensively explain the characteristics of the three transforming consciousnesses. What are the characteristics of the first transforming consciousness? The verses say,
First, the alaya, store, consciousness is, also, retribution and holder of all seeds. That which it grasps and holds, its location, and its perceptions are imperceptible. It is always associated with mental contact. Attention, feeling, conceptualization, and volition. In it, the only feeling is one of indifference. It is undefiled and morally neutral. And the same is true of mental contact, etc. It always evolves like a flowing stream, and is abandoned in the state of arhat.
Having discussed the first transforming consciousness, what are the characteristics of the second transforming consciousness? The verses say, next, the second transforming consciousness. This consciousness is called manas. It evolves supported by that, store consciousness, and with it as its object, and has the nature and character of thinking. It is always associated with four passions: delusion about self, view of self, self-conceit, and love of self, along with others such as contact. It is defiled and morally neutral, and bound to the place of birth. In the arhat, the samadhi of cessation, and the supramundane path, it does not exist.
This is how the second transforming consciousness is explained. What are the characteristics of the third transforming consciousness? The verses say, next, the third transforming consciousness with its sixfold distinction. Its nature and character are that of perception of the object, and it is good, bad, or neither. They are associated with universal mental activities. Those mental activities, with specific objects, the good, the passions, secondary passions, the non-determined, and all three feelings.
First, the universal mental activities, such as contact, etc. Next, those with specific objects, that is, desire, resolve, memory, samadhi, and discernment, prajna, whose objects are not the same. Faith, conscience, sense of shame, the three roots of good, such as non-craving, etc., vigor, serenity, vigilance, indifference, and harmlessness are the good mental activities. The passions, klesa, are craving, hatred, delusion, pride, doubt, and wrong views. The secondary passions, upaklesa, are anger, hostility, dissimulation, vexation, envy, avarice, deceit, hypocrisy, with harmfulness and vanity, lack of conscience and shamelessness, agitation and torpor, unbelief and indolence,
negligence and forgetfulness, distraction and incorrect knowing. The non-determined states mean remorse and sloth, applied thought and sustained thought, two pairs in two ways. Having discussed mental activities associated with the 6 kinds of consciousness, how should one understand their states of appearance? The verses say, Supported on the fundamental consciousness, the first 5 consciousnesses appear according to conditions, either together or not, like waves supported by water. Mental consciousness, the 6th consciousness, perpetually appears. Except in those born among the unconscious celestials. And in the 2 mindless samditis. And in those who are, in states of sloth and stupefaction.
We have extensively distinguished the characteristics of the 3 transforming consciousnesses as supports for the 2 parts that are transformed from them. How should we understand that the metaphorical self and dharmas that are transformations based on consciousness are not separate realities and as a consequence are all consciousness only? The verses say, the various consciousnesses transform as imagination and the imagined. As a result of this, all these are non-existent. Therefore, all are consciousness only. If there is nothing at all but consciousness and no external conditions at all, from what are the many imaginations born? The verses say, from the consciousness that is all seeds. Transformation occurs in such and such ways, due to the power of mutual influence. That and that imagination is born.
Even though internal consciousness exists, still, there are no external conditions, so what is the basis for the continuity of birth and death, samsara, among sentient beings? The verses say, the habit energy of various actions, together with the habit energy of the 2 graspings, when prior retribution is exhausted, subsequently produce other retribution. If there is only consciousness, why did the world-honored ones say in place after place in the scriptures that there are 3 natures, for each object? You should understand that the 3 natures are also not separate from consciousness. Why? The verses say,
Because of whatever imagination, such and such a thing is imagined. This imagined nature, parakalpitasvabhava, does not exist. The nature that is dependent on others, paratantrasvabhava, is discrimination born of conditions. The perfected nature, Paranispanasvabhava, is the eternal privation of the former nature from that dependent nature.
Therefore, this perfected nature and the dependent on others are neither different nor non-different, like the nature of impermanence, etc. One not perceived, the other is not perceived. If there are 3 natures, why did the world-honored one teach that all dharmas are wholly natureless, nisvabhava? The verses say, on the basis of these 3 natures, the threefold naturelessness is established. Therefore, the Buddha taught with a hidden intention that all dharmas are natureless. The first is naturelessness of characteristics, /aksana. The next is naturelessness of self-existence, the last is the nature that results from the privation of the former self and dharmas that are grasped.
This is the ultimate truth of all dharmas, and is also the same as true suchness, because it is eternally so in its nature. It is the true nature of consciousness only.
With regard to the last 5 verses showing the active state of consciousness only, the treatise, i.e. 30 verses, says, such are the characteristics and nature of consciousness only that have been demonstrated. Who awakens to it and enters, how, and by how many states, those who are endowed with the 2 dispositions, gotra, of the Mahayana, enter and awaken to it gradually, in 5 states. What is the meaning of the 2 dispositions of the Mahayana? The first is inherent disposition, prakriti-gotra. That is, causes, i.e. seeds, of pure dharmas existing naturally from beginningless time adhering to fundamental consciousness. The second is the disposition created by perfuming, vasana. That is, that which is created by perfuming caused by hearing, etc., from hearing the Dharma that flows uniformly from the realm of the Dharma. One must possess these 2 dispositions of the Mahayana in order to awaken to and enter consciousness only. What are the 5 states? The first is the state of equipment, samhara avastha. That is, cultivation of the aids to liberation, moksabhagya, of the Mahayana. Supported by the nature and characteristics of consciousness, they are able to deepen belief and understanding. What is the characteristic of this state? The verses say,
as long as one does not generate consciousness,
that seeks to abide in the nature of consciousness only, one is still unable to destroy the propensities of the twofold grasping. The second is the state of added effort, prayoga-vasta. That is, cultivation of the aids to cognitive penetration, nirveda-bhajiva, of the Mahayana. Abiding in the state of added effort enables one to eliminate gradually the grasper and the grasped. What are its characteristics? Setting the least thing before one. Saying, it is of the nature of consciousness only. One does not really abide in consciousness only, because there is something obtained.
The third is the state of thorough understanding, prativedhavasta. That is, the path of insight, dharganamarga, dwelt upon by all bodhisattvas. Abiding in the state of thorough understanding is like the real thorough understanding itself. What are its characteristics? Whenever, regarding the objective realm, knowledge is completely devoid of something obtained, then it dwells in consciousness only, because it is divorced from characteristics of the twofold grasping. The fourth is the state of cultivation, bhavana-avasta. That is, the path of cultivation, bhavana-marga, dwelt upon by all bodhisattvas. The state of cultivation is like really perceiving the noumenal reality and cultivating it over and over. What are its characteristics?
Devoid of anything obtained, inconceivable. This is supramundane knowledge. Because of abandoning the twofold coarseness, one realizes the transmutation of the support, asraya-paravriti. The fifth is the state of culmination, nishtha-vask. That is, abiding in supreme, perfect bodhi. By escaping the obstacles, perfect and bright, it has the ability to change sentient beings forever. What are its characteristics? It is the pure realm. Inconceivable, good, eternal, blissful, and the body of liberation, which in the great muni is named Dharma, body.